Okay, good evening and a very warm welcome to Content with Conscience, AI's next chapter. It's amazing to see so many of you here at Engine Shed this evening. We had a feeling this topic would draw a crowd, not just a big crowd, because we've got a lot of people online also, but a diverse one. AI touches practically all industries, so it's been great already to see people here across academia, industry, government, and the wider innovation ecosystem. For those of you I already know, hello. And for those of you who don't, I'm Caroline Thompson. I'm the Set Squid Bristol Centre Manager here, which forms part of Bristol Innovation. So if you don't know anything about Set Squid, please come and grab me at some point during this evening. I'll tell you all about it. This event is part of our Foresight Live series delivered by Bristol Innovations. The aim of Foresight Live is to bring people together who might not otherwise find themselves in the same room, to explore, discuss and collaborate around critical technologies shaping our future. Our previous sessions have covered areas like quantum, telecoms, semiconductors and AI, and tonight very much continues that conversation. It's only a matter of time before we start hosting these events in CM1 from next September. I'm going to randomly point in a general direction. I think this is where CM1 is, the other side of the station. It's our new shiny building over the road, which you may have seen next to the station if you came by train. The hoardings have started to go up, which is really exciting. This evening, we're focusing on how artificial intelligence is changing the way creative work is produced, owned, governed, and valued, from authorship and audience engagement to gaming, immersive experiences, and AI-powered tools. The discussion will look beyond the technology itself to interrogate trust, governance, regulation, workforce impact, and environmental cost, asking whether organizations and governments are genuinely prepared for the long-term consequences of widespread AI adoption. We're incredibly fortunate to have such a strong panel, and you'll find out a little bit more about them in a minute, with us this evening, bringing together perspectives from academia, industry and innovation, which sets us up for a thoughtful and hopeful provocative discussion about what AI's next chapter should look like. I'll pass up to the speakers in a minute to introduce themselves. There'll be plenty of opportunity for discussion and questions after the panel, so I encourage you to get thinking. Let's give them some really hard questions. We've also got some food and drink afterwards in platform 4, so please stick around and meet others in the room. You don't know who you might bump into. That sounds a bit sinister, doesn't it? But there'll be some great people that you may not have spoken to that is an opportunity to go and grab a conversation with. Finally, an important note, before tonight's session, as I mentioned, it's being live streamed. So if you're joining us online, hello. I need to wave to that white camera. So if everybody give the white camera a little wave when they know that we're here. And for those of you in the room, please bear this in mind during the Q&A and panel. Unfortunately, we have Claudia from my team who's looking after the online questions and all the panelists. I don't need to click any buttons. Phew. So with that, let's get started. I'd like to pass over to our panel chair, Thierry.
Turn the mic on as well. Thank you, Caroline. I think you've covered pretty much the welcome there. I think the one thing that I would add maybe as a kind of a side note, I'm not going to ask any kind of outright questions on what are the ethics of AI, but instead I'm going to invite the panel to sort of consider their answers through that lens, rather than having one really broad question, which I think would not have very fruitful answers, or would get one answer that would last 45 minutes. But I'm going to ask the panel to very quickly introduce themselves, and we will do the panel for about an hour, and then we'll have half an hour Q&A. If you're really desperate to ask questions, I'm going to check in about 45 minutes, so we might move on to the Q&A sooner than that. But with that, actually the microphone is over there, so let's start with you, Ben.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben Ackland. I'm from Meaning Machine. We're a game and tech startup studio in Bristol, and we are empowering authors to use AI characters and quests in their creative experiences.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Richard Cole. I'm a senior lecturer in digital futures here at the University of Bristol. I also co-direct the Bristol Digital Game Lab.
Perfect. Hi everyone, I'm Megan Butler. I'm the UK AI workforce lead at KPMG. The only other interesting thing about me is that I also work on my PhD. I'm writing my thesis now on the adoption of AI. So if you're ever interested in a conversation about AI, that's pretty much my entire life at the moment.
Sounds good to me, Megan. My name's Sue Turner. I'm Professor in Practice for AI and Digital Tech at the University of Bristol Business School. So that's 2 days a week. The rest of my life is very much AI as well. I run a company called AI Governance, and we help organisations and leaders and aspiring leaders figure out how to use AI with wisdom and integrity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I might stay on you then, Sue, because you have the microphone. What do we mean when we talk about creativity in the context of AI? What does that encompass?
I think wind back 2 years, 3 years, and most people would say to me, oh, AI can't be creative. You know, machines can't be creative. That is something that is inherently human and will always be. But I think if you look at Einstein's definition of creativity, he said creativity is about seeing what everyone sees and then doing things that no one has ever thought of. And look at some of our image generation tools now compared to 2 or 3 years ago. They do see what everyone sees because they're trained on all the works that are out there, and they create some really weird images that you might challenge and say, actually, nobody human would create those images. So perhaps under that definition, we can say that AI can in itself be creative. So for me, it's not so much about are machines creative? I think they can be under that definition, but who owns that creativity and how do we think of it? How do we value the creativity that machines can produce versus the creativity that humans can produce? When I think about human works, I think about things like, I'm wearing a necklace tonight, which has got a teeny little piece of Murano glass on it from Venice. And, Murano glass, this incredible handcrafted, very expensive if you want to buy a whole chandelier. But I can just about afford a teeny little piece. But if you could compare that to glass made in a factory, which is, again, machine made, it has a different quality to it. It can be mass produced. It can be very cheap. So we're getting this dilemma of creativity, which we want to value and we want to say has a particular resonance with us as human beings. But at the same time, there's all this slop, this cheap stuff that's out there that we don't want to use this same word for. So for me, in a nutshell, it comes down to different words and how we talk about the creative process and who are creators. For me, I would never use the word author when I'm talking about an AI. I think authors are humans. I think artists are humans. I think musicians are humans. So yes, a machine can produce works that are musical, but I would never call it a musician.
Yeah, that makes sense. You very neatly managed to touch on a few points there that we are going to pick up on. But I might ask Megan's view as well on this from a consultant's point of view.
That's a really great question, because coming from the business world, creativity can sometimes come across a bit almost like a dirty word, where we think of it as being artists mostly. But I argue creativity is going to become one of the most valuable resources that we have in the future, especially in a world of AI. And the World Economic Forum agrees with me. They say it's one of the top 4. And the head engineer of a product that we work with also agrees with me with creativity. And my argument is that if we think about creativity in the UK, we've almost done ourselves a little bit of a disservice because the government has actually labeled the creative industries and defined what's in it. And it's very much kind of the more traditional things that we think of creativity as an artist, where in reality, if we think about it, scientists, when they're setting up their experiments, it requires a ton of creativity. And in the consulting world, right now, we're massively being impacted by AI. Not only is the work we're doing being impacted, but our clients are being impacted massively. And where we're seeing the most amount of impact is in work and how work gets done traditionally in organizations. And it's going to take a ton of creativity. And again, I agree with you. The creativity comes from the people. That it's going to take a ton of creativity for us to think about how do we redesign processes, how do we redesign organization and how work gets done. And so I think we need to start thinking about creativity in the much broader range. And I agree, like it was really cool. Quite a few years ago, we had a conference that we did in London, a huge conference in 2018 was the first one. And we had several people come in. There was one section of the conference floor where it was looking at AI in the arts. And it was really interesting. There was one photo that AI created that really touched me. And I have a photo of it hidden away in one of my digital hoards back home. And the interesting thing was I agree with you. It was really neat because the system was creative, but it was creative based off of a bunch of human work that it redesigned, which is part of the innovation process. But like, will it come up with something truly new and unique, something outside of our realm? I question that. But I think when we talk about creativity with AI, we need to broaden our understanding of what we mean by creativity, and understand that's going to take creativity from a business perspective, from a scientific lens, from the creative industries as well, to think about that as we move forward into a world of AI.
Awesome. Yeah. Richard, I don't want to preempt your answer, but please tell us about your work that you've done with the Egyptian exhibit as well, because I think that is a really good example of creativity in AI.
Of course, very happy to talk about that. I'd like to pick up though on what Megan was just saying, and Sue as well, because I think a bit of a historical perspective. I'm a historian by training. I've moved into the digital space, so I carry the historical perspective through. Is really valuable here because we've continuously gone through from antiquity to today different moments where we've redefined what creativity means, what authorship means, often in a literal legal sense, where we've pulled down and said, okay, an author is an owner of this IP for this particular work. Go back to antiquity, authorship was diverse, it was distributed, it was an oral storytelling culture. And then when everything gets formalized in a kind of written form, then authorship means something different. Then if you sort of take us forward to sort of more recent times, different areas of media creation have defined creativity and protected that creativity in very different ways. So you get sort of jazz is about continuously adopting previous forms and working with them and moving within that context, in the purpose of creating something new though. And then if we move to AI, I think it is at its core a recompilation engine of what we have already done. So by that definition, I don't think it can do anything new. And it can't necessarily push forward. What it does actually is kind of the low level, or kind of the kind of quite soft creativity, I guess you could define it, whereby as human authors, we've always dipped in and out of and recompiled other people's work. That is how we move forward. But that doesn't actually, I think, necessarily speak to the Einstein idea of moving ideas forward, which I think is perhaps where AI, if it remains at its core of kind of recompilation of what exists, is it ever going to do that? Again, I think, Megan, you're right. I'm doubtful. It's not to say that I think humans have something inherent, because I think we have done what AI has done throughout our culture, but we've not been able to do it at that same kind of scale. That's what seems sort of magical about it. So yeah, I often find a sort of historical perspective is helpful. I'll talk about culture questions, I think, in a bit, because I think there's other questions that are relevant. I'd like to hear Ben's thoughts. But
yeah, sure. Well, I guess, are we talking about AI being creative, or are we talking about humans being creative with AI? From our perspective, it's more of the latter. I think reflecting over maybe the last century or so, creativity kind of started, in particular writing, started with creating content and putting that content out there, and that was tended to be linear content that was consumed, books, then films, etc. And in the last 30, 40 years or so, well, 30 years or so, we've seen the consumer be part of that creativity. So with social media, with commenting, with emergent worlds, with being able to choose your path of your own adventure, etc. And for us, AI is just the sort of third piece of the puzzle to that creativity journey, and part of creativity over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's not that AI is leading the creativity or is the creator, but it's a third almost role person in creativity, effectively in the production of that output that's then consumed and enjoyed.
What are some of the applications that we're seeing of that then? Maybe I'll stay on you and then we can move back down, because that's easier with a microphone.
Yeah, I mean, a few of the things that AI is really good at, particularly, so we're working on games, immersive experiences, so that will be the focus of a lot of my comments. AI is great at joining the dots, at filling gaps, at translating vision or content into a slightly different form for the purpose of delivery in that particular experience. And what that gives us is the ability to handle more emergent scenarios, to give the player more freedom or the consumer more freedom when they're enjoying an experience. But that's still for us driven by this kind of human authored like backbone and spine. And so I think, fundamentally, one of the applications in games and in immersive is effectively filling the gaps to allow more emergence in those experiences.
Thanks. From our perspective, we've done a couple of projects with Mini Machine where we've studied audience responses to their games, which are, in this case, 2 murder mystery games where you can have free-form conversation with characters. You're trying to interrogate those characters, make sense of the world, find out who's done it, piece together the whole mystery. To me, it's a natural evolution, again, with the historical mindset of the murder mystery genre, where we've had kind of versions that you can ask more or less kind of guided questions and have more or less influence over the world. This allows you kind of ultimate freedom, arguably, but we were interested in what does that actually look like in practice. If you sit down with players and see them play in the moment, what does that mean? And we found that it does allow for certain types of role play experiences that you couldn't get in other sort of modes and other genres. We were also really interested in the underlying technology, though. So for the Bristol Museums project we did quite recently, we took Mini Machines technology, we worked with Bristol Museums and a research team within the university, and we built an experience for the Egyptian gallery, for those who may have been there. And what that entailed was a game on your phone where you're talking to the Egyptian gods and they are giving you quests to explore and engage with around the gallery. So a game on your phone with quests, nothing new there. But the AI allowed for free-form conversation, so you can endlessly interrogate and inquire and actually engage in a kind of semi-research process yourself as you go through that space. You can inquire about the objects you're seeing. You can inquire about the mythology of that space. You can ask kind of questions that are just only going to sort of be raised by the fact that you're actually exploring this gallery in a kind of quite active and directed way. And we were doing this intervention because we would notice that when people go to the gallery, although it is quite a questy, quite dark, quite interesting space, they just sort of walk around quite passively. They don't really stop and linger. So we were interested in, can this change how people experience that kind of cultural heritage content in the moment? Again, we did a research study to show that, especially with groups of people, it really does work. It's like an escape room. So again, AI is not the creative partner. It's just a sort of engine almost that allows for those kinds of experiences to be designed, but it still requires humans to come up with the ideas.
It sounds like a really good event, and I'm kind of jealous that I missed it. If you put it on again, please let me know. Megan, I don't know if you want to contribute to that as well.
Yeah, no, I was finding that really fascinating, but I think it's interesting because doing like technically very different work using AI, it's the exact same thing that I'm finding with our teams, is that AI can do some amazing stuff and it can make really dumb things seem smart, but it's really about the people using it. And that's where we get the real intelligence from it. And when you're able to think critically about how you're prompting it, it's not just, and the conversation, it's not just writing one prompt and going with it, but having that conversation, giving it the context, giving it the background. I know within our team, we use AI a lot. We use and we develop agents, and we're helping clients understand how to use their AI. So in that sense, I'm seeing it as, if you kind of just go and have a quick conversation, write a report for me, it will do a good job, but it won't be context based. It lacks that awareness. But when you're able to put in all that information, give it that context, correct it regularly, it comes out with something really unique, and it can be a really great enabler. But I see this a lot. I see this a lot in conversation in business. We see automation potential, and we can cut roles because of that. And I worry because what I'm really seeing is it can save us 6 hours in helping us with that creative process, but it's really hard to go to that same developer or to the same person writing a report or whatever it is and say, I can cut 6 hours of your day out. It's much easier to save somebody some time and amplify their effort rather than seeing it as a replacement in any way.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on the theme of sort of what are we actually using AI for? Anybody know Merriam-Webster's word of the year 2025? Slop. Yeah. The chief executive of YouTube said that their mission for 2026 was to reduce slop. I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing a reduction. I'm seeing it going the other way. So people are using the tools because they can. And I guess they think they're being creative when they put together some little YouTube video with the automated voice and the clips of stills of whatever the subject is, and it doesn't actually relate to what they're talking about. And it's all very, very amateurish. And then you've got to say, well, what's the reward function? Because that's why people are putting this together, because there's a reward function that is motivating them in that direction. The reward function is more likes, more eyeballs, more attention on whatever it is they're putting out there. And therefore, they are motivated to be what they would probably think of as being creative, but in a way that actually doesn't excite us. It doesn't appeal to us as humans. So that for me is the challenge. And again, thinking about the history point, when the printing press first came about, the first decades, it was all about the publisher, the printer, having the power. The printer got all the money, all the reward for whatever it was they put out there. And then it was the Statute of Anne in 1710. I'm looking at the historian here. Yeah, I'm getting a nod. 1710. That was the big change, which said, actually, we want to motivate people to create knowledge, which we will then have in the public domain. So that was what said the author retains the copyright for a certain period of time. After that, the knowledge is in the public domain for anybody to enjoy. So that was the really big change in power. The power dynamic, the reward function changed from saying if you write something, the publisher gets the benefit, to saying if you write something, you get some benefit out of it. So that was how we've lived ever since, until now. And now we're saying, no, the reward function changes. It's how you get the attention on anything rather than saying it's quality. And that sort of disintermediation, taking quality publishers, people with experience, domain knowledge, expertise out of the equation, is very democratizing, but also is pushing us towards incredible low quality. And that's a real frustration that how do we value anything if the good stuff is swamped by the bad stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that our mission is to reduce slop, and yeah, as you say, is it because it gets engagement, which makes YouTube money? Which why would they want to stop that? I'll go over to Ben if you want to pass the microphone, because I quite like to hear talking about maybe not necessarily slop, but specifically looking at the gaming industry. Is the gaming industry aware of the risks and challenges that AI poses? And I know you've only got the Meaning Machines point of view, but what you see across the industry, would you say that they know what's coming?
Yeah, I think the games industry feels very resistant to AI generally, I would say. We're overloading the term AI all the time in this conversation, right? But if we talk about generative AI generating content for games or in games, for instance, as a starting point, I think, the general trend over the last sort of 18 months, 24 months or so has obviously been the drop of, ChatGPT and AI tools in everyone's hands and everyone exploring, at least becoming familiar with what they do. But equally seeing the slot that's generated, and obviously the games industry is driven by, certainly in a large proportion, creatives wanting to put out enjoyable experiences that players want to spend time playing. And I think very quickly, you only have to look at sort of tech demos that came out over the last 18 months, 24 months or so, and you'll see plenty of slot, plenty of non-crafted, machine repeatable experiences that are, badged some kind of AI, new novel AI experience. And that's not what the games industry really wants to put out in general, I would say. So, but I think the industry is certainly starting now to see more opportunities for AI, certainly in prototyping at scale, in testing lots of new ideas, in getting to maybe the sort of 80% mark with demos and that kind of thing to like prove out ideas, but then really handcrafting the end result, putting all the effort in a little bit later to deliver the experience. And just very quickly to reflect on some of the work that we've done with the University of Bristol, I think we are starting to see what AI can open up in terms of new possibilities in game experiences, in terms of, as I was saying earlier, like the freedom that it gives players, the agency that it can give players to sort of direct the story and be part of the journey that the game is taking them on.
Richard, I'd quite like to hear your perspective on that as well from the university point of view.
Sure. I can talk, I guess, from two particular angles. One is the player, and the other is the industry. I think from the player side of things, we're actually seeing a kind of across the board significant dislike, and indeed actually quite kind of aggressive dislike of generative AI content in games, especially when that content was tried to be hidden effectively from players. And if you've got people who spend a lot of time, hundreds of hours in the game experience, and they expect it to be handcrafted by humans, and then they come across stuff that's been, made by a machine, and that's probably meant that other people haven't had their jobs or lost their jobs, or corners have been cut, then actually you get a really visceral reaction, and games have been review bombed for that very purpose. Anno 117 was released with AI imagery in its sort of loading screens, that was torn apart. AI voice acting elements in Clair Obscur, that was torn apart. There's lots of recent examples. That's why we were really interested to actually sit down and go, well, where, if any, value does actually lie for the player. And I think we have been able to start to discern beneath the hype, beneath kind of where the industry is quite, I would argue, poorly applied these tools, or applied them to cut costs, to to be part of a. They basically made their own development processes more complicated because they're adding these things in, they're not getting the value at the end, they're having to then roll back things. So it's all a really big problem within the industry. So but the players also don't want it. So you're getting this really complicated sort of twin issue there. Then from within the industry, as Ben has been alluding to, there's lots of experimentation about where you could actually get value in development processes, but then you have to actually do R&D within the company. So there are companies investing in that and taking the time, taking people off projects onto specific R&D projects and say, well, could we develop a system for our particular output that helps, that makes sense of this issue, that opens up opportunities here? And we are starting to see some of those things come through. We're also seeing a complete misunderstanding of what's actually being developed and put out there. So for those of you who may be familiar with, we're getting to see world models now. So this is models of like entire game worlds that you can just type a prompt with and get it. It normally only lasts about a minute. This absolutely hit the stocks of Unity, one of the major game developers recently. But no one actually, but that makes no sense, because the world models that have been produced are not going to replace Unity. They are not tools that can actually be used to make games. All they're doing is scraping huge amount of existing game data and replicating, again, recompiling something that looks a bit like a game for a minute and costs hundreds and hundreds of pounds for you to access and to do this, and huge amounts of compute, and doesn't actually deliver a game or indeed a set of tools that developers can use. But it still hit the price of Unity, the stock of Unity, because investors didn't really understand what they were seeing. They thought, oh, this is now going to be the new future of game development. So again, I think it's misunderstanding, it's industry bad practice, malpractice, uncertainty around how to use these things. And then players sort of starting to observe this and sort of critique it and have their own perspective on it. So I think, again, it's just cutting through that hype. It's taking time with businesses to understand where you could reasonably use these things, where you shouldn't, and then developing content that actually makes sense of these tools in the moment and that delivers value for players.
I find that quite interesting that there is this aversion by players to have AI in their games, but then on the other hand, we have all these consumers, as Sue said, who just churn out all this slop and quite happily think of it as creativity. But I'm not a gamer, but I get it. I would want something that I know someone has carefully created a world for me to explore or solve puzzles in or whatever it may be. I don't want just an AI that gives me something that is replicating something else that has come before. That's the cushy questions out of the way. I want to move on to governance, and I might start with you, Megan, and you've already got the microphone, so that's really good. Are corporations on top of this? Which I know is a big question, but maybe that can start us off.
Our corporations, our government's on top of this.
Yeah.
I just want to, just one quick point. So interesting that you guys are saying that, because I think we're seeing that across all industries. You can take that exact lesson and place it to almost any business. And it's the same thing, finding out where AI is actually going to add value, not cut costs, and not destroy the user experience, whether it's a customer, whether it's a client, whether it's a gamer. That's a big piece. But going into the government, that's a huge bag of worms right now. And I think part of it is that I want to say about that is that I was at an event not that long ago, and it was data ethics and AI. And the one thing that surprised me was how much the conversation hasn't moved on in the last decade, since we really kind of started getting to the big conversations around AI ethics. And that we still have a lot of questions out there about what it means to be ethical, even especially from a creative perspective, and what we're talking about here today, about who owns the work, how are we using it, and especially, and I'm sure coming from the gaming industry, you have a lot of user data. So how do we do that, and how do we treat data? Because we definitely come from an era where we collected data quite indiscriminately about people, even with GDPR rules, but we're coming into an era where I think we need to rethink think that and think about how we collect data on people. And I hope at least that we will get pressured into a world where we don't just all kind of accept that we've lost privacy and just give up all our data rights and everybody's kind of creating profiles on us. But I like the term data dignity and realizing that the data is connected to real people and that we need to be treating it as such. But the challenge is we just have such different rules coming out of governments right now. And I think like one of the big one that I think we'll all get touched on is around copyright issues. We see a German low court that said an AI algorithm learning off of licensed work was no go. It wasn't cool. It was copyright. Where a UK High Court said it's not actually making a duplicate. It's not actually keeping it. It's only learning off of it. So it's not copyright. So we're seeing literally the exact opposite views on the same subject coming out of different countries. And then of course the UK and the US have taken different views. In the US, we have different states. So I think we are coming into that even more challenging era of using AI and need to be conscientious, not just of what we're doing, but where we're doing it, because different rules will apply, especially as EU AI, if I can get those letters out in the right order, EU AI regulations come about. I think we're going to create new pressures because there is some argument to reducing the regulations to encourage innovation, but there's also how do we do it safely in a world where this data represents us. It represents real people and a real world. And we do have a choice right now. Do we go down a path where AI becomes kind of like our overlords, but like in a world where AI is superior, where data is just, as I say, we give up our privacy, or do we go down a world where we say, no, we don't accept that. And we want to be in a world where we realize data is connected to real people, that we want to have real rules and regulations in place to help protect that as we go forward. So it is, as I say, it's a big bag of worms, and sorry to give you that, that type of consulting answer where it all depends. But it does depend a lot, but I think we're at a point where we need to have these conversations and start thinking about where do we want to take this in the future and where do we want to be positioned, especially being a part of the conversations.
Yeah. I will get back on, I think, on the government question, but I want to hear from Sue as well, because you do work with corporate leaders as well, companies as well, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's really interesting when you think about exactly as Megan's saying there, the leaders of organizations, people in organizations are having to decide for themselves what the right thing to do is, because we're lacking this overarching sense of what the right thing is, whether that's by regulation or court cases or whatever. So we've got to make decisions for ourselves. Anybody want to guess what proportion of FTSE 350 companies have a published code of business ethics? Anybody think it's 90%? No.
I guess 2.
2%. Okay. Somewhere in between. It's about 50% have got a code of business ethics, let alone a code of AI ethics. So that we've got this massive gap where leaders don't really know how they're going to frame this. And EY did a survey last year where it was enterprise level. So, big companies, they surveyed nearly 1,000 large companies and they asked them how they were governing. Oh, sorry, first of all, what they were using AI, what tools they were using. And 75% of them were using generative AI in their businesses. Okay, you'd expect that. And then they asked them what sort of governance have you got in place? Only a third of them actually had formal governance in place. And then they asked them to recognize how they should control and treat 5 different AI risks. Only 12% of them got all 5 answers correct. So we've got there's lack of government direction. There's a lack of knowledge amongst leaders of what they should do. So huge opportunity. Hey, University of Bristol, we can educate the next generation of leaders and really inspire them, as we do try to do. And I've been amazed at the quality of some of the activities going on in the university and the inspiration that people are getting on for that next generation of how they can use AI tools with wisdom and integrity. What does that really mean? How does that shape what the decisions they might make in the future? Which is great for the next generation of leaders, but what about the people who are actually making those decisions in organisations today? So they are adrift, and I did a session just yesterday in London with a very diverse group of leaders on this whole topic. What should they use AI for in their organisations? How do they frame those discussions? And we talked about responsible AI framework, and we talked about the 8 stages of good AI governance, and so there's real concrete things for them to do. But you could see them going, okay, I get it, I'm on the bus now, but how do I convince everybody else back at the ranch? And this is the problem, that we've got to convince people all the time to see that doing the right thing is in their best interests, rather than just saying, quick win, grab some money, run away and don't care about the consequences.
Sorry, I turned my mic off. Again, quite a few interesting things on there that I want to pick up on, and I'm sort of also conscious that we sort of used up half the time already. I want to quickly look at data, though, which Megan touched on. Are companies structuring data in the right way? Are they using data in the right way with AI today? Never mind, do they know what's coming in 5-10 years' time? Are they putting the right? Yeah, are they putting the right things in place?
That's a great question. I think when we look at leaders in the AI space, that's one of the key things they've done right, is to have the data in the right place. So that readiness is there. So when they're bringing AI in, it's not a massive leap, but it's where a lot of organizations are struggling and continue to struggle, because it's not the big sexy project of rolling out an AI. Fixing your data foundations for your organization isn't the coolest of tasks, unfortunately. We are getting into an era where we can use AI to help us with that process and make it a lot cheaper, faster, easier. But that's definitely a big gap that we see in the industry right now. So totally agree with you. The huge opportunity with AI governance and supporting organizations and leaders around that, and big opportunity in getting those data foundations right. And getting those data foundations also equals getting data ethics right. Because without the good foundations, you have things like spreadsheets running around the organization with no controls on it. And that can be dangerous, let alone with just data in a spreadsheet, let alone using AI. So I think that those two together need to progress, and that's where leading organizations are at.
Yeah, Sue was keen to contribute, but I'm also happy to
jumping quickly on that. Yeah, absolutely. So what I am seeing from talking to the people who are working on the next generation of AI tools, so they're out in San Francisco, they're in London, they're in Singapore, they're in China. They are, they've drunk the Kool-Aid. You know, they really are convinced that the next generation of AI tools that we won't see for perhaps 18 months or 2 years are going to be so powerful that it's going to blow our socks off, and we're all going to worship the machine or whatever. I don't know. But the one thing I would say to my clients is, if that's true, then we need to spend the next 2 years organizing our data better, getting it out of those silos, getting it out of people's heads, getting it out of the spreadsheet on my C drive, as opposed to, you know, something that's more accessible. And we need to unpick our workflows, because we have horrible workflows in our organizations that we've created. And then we thought, well, this was a good way of doing something. Then someone else comes along, takes over the job and does it slightly differently. And it's very, very messy. If we can spend the next 2 years in training, if you like, getting our data organized, unpicking those horrible workflows, understanding what we're really trying to achieve, then if the next generation of AI tools come along and they are so much more powerful, we'll be ready to decide what we want to do with it, as opposed to where lots of leaders are at the moment, where they're just sitting back and saying, I really don't even know how to get started because I need to do that unsexy 2-year piece of work getting my data organized. So that's what I'd say to people. Think about this as being your training for the marathon, and then the marathon starts with the next generation of AI tools, not the ones we have today.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of nodding from Richard and Ben, so
just to pick one example of that in practice, when we did the Culture Quest experience with Bristol Museum, it was a really interesting test bed for them, because it required them to work through all the data they had in the gallery to make sure the metadata was up to date, could be parsed by the systems that we were using. And that was essential to actually provide an experience that wasn't just talking to ChatGPT in a gallery, which you can do and is terrible. Because it will just generically provide anything. It will misunderstand context. It won't be able to hold memory, et cetera, at least right now. And I think we've seen an example of this, talking about the sort of content with conscious, where it hasn't worked. So there was a project, well, a sort of a hobby project called the Living Museum, where a technologist just scraped all of the data from the British Museum's website and then allowed you to just have a chat interface with all the objects. Sounds quite nice, sounds quite harmless. There was nothing in there beyond the object. So when you started having a conversation, it could take you off on any route, and I mean any route. So, you know, museums are really conscious about colonialism, about decolonizing their collections, about understanding repatriation, about thinking about where collections have come from, about human remains policies. All this sort of stuff is what we were working with Bristol Museums and putting into the system that we had, so that if players ask questions about these things, they would be able to be taken down a journey that actually makes sense of all these really significant ongoing challenges and debates in cultural heritage. couldn't do that with the Living Museum. And so you got sort of wildly wrong, inaccurate, offensive, morally questionable, ethically problematic responses regularly. And it blew up online. That you can go and read about the kind of furore that it generated. But again, it just shows that that consciousness bit is absolutely essential to the thing, and then having your data in place.
Yeah, just excuse me, just a couple of points to add. Organizing your data gets you better results, so it's worth the investment for sure. And I think we're talking about organizing data, but I think we should also be talking about protecting data. And we should be talking about valuing data. You know, understand what value you've got in your data. Understand what your opportunities are as a business or a creative studio or whatever. Protect your data. Understand how it's being processed. What you're willing to give away to get a result. What you want to keep within your business because it represents your IP, etc. So they're the only couple of brief things I'd add to those points.
Yeah, important things though, and it's something that I've spoken to a few people over coffee and just now. It's a lot of people just sort of put their data into AI and let AI do its thing, and they don't really think about it kind of beyond that. Yeah, so yeah, that's a really important. Thanks, Ben. I want to look at, because we've touched on this, and I wasn't aware of the example with the website that scraped the British Museum's thing. But how do we build trust in this system? Which again is kind of a big question. But I'll maybe ask Richard first, because you touched on this with your. If you really don't want to, I can ask one of the others.
I mean, there is a whole research area around trust security and stuff that's going on at the moment. There's a lot of investment in projects in that space. It's not my area, so I'm going to caveat everything that's not the area I work in as an academic. From a kind of anecdotal project level thing, I can I guess talk to it, and I think that is again just sitting down with actual users, visitors, in this case of the gallery, with that project, with players of Media Machines games, and deeply understanding their responses. And we've categorized responses in the research we've done here as like, what do people do when they engage with these systems? How do they think about what they're doing? So what is their reasoning process? And then what do they feel? I know other people in this room have run projects that have kind of dug into the interesting things that happen when humans and machines co-create everything. But that's effectively what we're interested in. I think if you can map those responses across those different dimensions, then you get a really interesting picture of not just where things work, but how trust in the system builds. Because when we were interviewing people after playing Media Machines games, even a year or two ago now, about a year ago actually, exactly, there was really interesting questions where some people were saying, well, this could be really misappropriated or used in really problematic ways, or it could, become like dating sims, or people get lost with these characters. And lo and behold, over the last year, what have we seen? Problematic dating sims come out. People, very, very sadly committing suicide because AI chatbots told them to. So that's not how to build trust in the system, obviously. But I've also talked to lawyers working in the space, and they're saying, well, regulation alone can't save us. We can't regulate our way out of these things, especially now that the genie's out the bottle. So is it about framing? Is it about continually telling people this is what you're engaging with? This is the kind of system. These are its limitations. These are the ways in which it's trying to get itself to you to trust it, and why you perhaps shouldn't. It's unlikely that those things are necessarily going to work, because if people could just turn them off or they'll ignore them. So it actually gets to a really deep psychological issue, which is why there is a whole research area around trust and security and everything, because it's deeply socio-technical issue. It's about our relationship with technology, and that's very complex.
I see a lot of nodding from Megan. Please tell her.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a really tough one, and it's not a new issue either. It's something that's been going on for quite some time, and we are definitely in a hype cycle right now where, the slop's coming out. We want to go fast. We want to break things, take people on the journey. It's not going to be perfect right away. But that's also what breaks down the trust, is if you're digging through the data that you've created for a project and all of a sudden you're seeing mistakes in there and it's been AI generated. Well, now we don't trust the algorithm because we see that one mistake. It hasn't been verified by a person. So we have to be very conscientious of that. And I think that's part of what's probably going to crash us out of this hype cycle. The last hype cycle, we were kind of crashed out of it because 2020 came along, and all of a sudden our focus went from AI is really cool and it's coming and we're working with it to how do we respond respond to a global phenomenon, and then crisis after crisis after that happening. And now we're back into that hype cycle. And we're seeing it come out again. As you say, we're seeing the poor quality videos, which people are going to get fed up with, and they're going to skip past. And then you're not going to want to be on that platform because all it is this poor quality. And we saw that in the last one, in the last wave. One of the big ones, and was one of my favorite to watch, was when chatbots. Everybody had to have a chatbot all of a sudden. It was about 2018, 2019. If you did not have a chatbot on your website, like, how old are you? Like, how out of date are you? And they were just form filling exercises. And I remember the one that irritated me the most on a site, when it would keep popping up and say, do you want to hear a joke? And I'd be like, yeah, sure, I want a joke. I'd be like, give me your email. And I was just like, I don't want to give you my email. And then so I closed it down. And then a few minutes later, pop back up. You want to hear a joke? I'm like, yeah, I want to hear a joke. So I think we need to be ultra cautious, because it could seem the greatest thing, especially when we're in these hype cycles. And if we don't deliver on it, and people don't have that user experience that they want, as you say, they get lost in a dark corner, and then they don't like the AI because all it does is keep me stuck in a dark corner and I don't know how to get out of it. People are going to get fed up, and then that shine is going to wear off really quickly. So I think part of that building trust is understanding where we are, and understanding that we need, if you want to make it through this cycle, is that you have to build trust. And you do that through having accuracy, but also being aware of your limitations and recognizing it is a deep social technical issue. And some people are walking in very mistrusting to begin with, and other people are walking in going, let's go with it. So we have to realize that there's different reactions to it. I come from it from a business perspective, where I'm looking at workers, and if they see mistakes in the work that's happening, they're not going to trust that system, because their whole job is going to become watching the AI outputs. And it's just like, well, how much better of a job is that, monitoring a computer over just doing the work yourself and knowing it's accurate the first time? And is it really saving us time? So I think that it's going to be a tricky area to navigate. And part of the building trust is having it working, and not running so fast that we trip over ourselves in this space.
And I think trust it's a strange thing, isn't it? You think about how we can quickly move as a society and as individuals from not trusting to trusting, or back again. Waymo, self-driving cars are coming to London this year, apparently. And there's an opportunity there for us all to jump in a self-driving car, have a go, see what it feels like. I tried it in San Francisco last summer, and it's a very strange experience when you first set off. But actually, you very quickly go, hang on a minute, I trust a human driver I've never met before to drive me safely. So yeah, the machine seems to be doing okay. And you move incredibly quickly from fear, skepticism to trust and faith in the machine. And it was exemplified for me quite neatly, because the day after my Waymo ride, I needed to take an Uber across San Francisco to go the other way. And the Uber driver turned up in the car with a crack all the way across the windscreen, whereas the Waymo was beautifully maintained. And when we were at a red stoplight, the Uber just started to creep forward, and the driver jumped on the brakes and said, hey, it must have zoned out there. And I'm thinking, give me my Waymo back. That doesn't zone out. It's just not a thing. So, it's how quickly we build trust. And as a society, we kind of flip from one extreme to the other without necessarily going through these more rational processes. So there's opportunity and threat there. There's opportunity for businesses to take advantage of us, to take advantage of this nature that we have and push us in directions that we might want to go. So we try to bring in regulations, like in the EU AI Act. There's a requirement there for companies that are affected by the Act to give some AI literacy training to people. And that might be people who are internal in a company building a tool, sure, but it could also be the users of a tool. So you might previously been a non-exec director of an insurance company. And there we were talking about, okay, so if somebody wants to buy some insurance and we're using an AI model to decide what the level of premium is that we're going to charge them, do we need to tell them about that? And how would we tell them about that in a way that they can't just switch it off or just skip past it? Yeah, pretend I've seen that little video that takes 30 seconds. And if my competitor insurance companies don't do that, then I'm introducing friction into the system, which might mean I don't sell so much insurance and they sell more and I go out of business. So there's all these competitive pressures that are pushing people away from doing the right thing. So I don't have an answer. As you say, very complicated, socio-technical, so many different factors in it. But I hope that as humans, we will push and keep pushing ourselves to be skeptical. I love it when people are skeptical about technology, and I love it when they're asking good questions. But it is very easy to get suckered in by how magical it all seems.
Yeah. Yeah, I realise we've almost been talking for an hour, so I will ask one question, but in the meantime, please think of questions that you might want to ask the panel, and I will get to those very shortly. But I want to. I have so many questions that I think are important that we're not going to get to, but that's fine. But if we talk about trust, how do we instill trust in people that the AI is not going to replace them? Whether it is the, having to fix the mistakes that AI currently makes, or whether it is a case of, well, we're letting 20,000 people go because an AI can do the job,
Right.
even if it can't.
So I'll bring the skeptic into the room, shall I? And
Yes,
then perhaps
please.
others will cheer us up a bit more. I think an awful lot of jobs will go. And if I am talking to a chief executive and they're saying, I'm going to tell my people that AI will only enhance their work and there will be no redundancies, I'm saying to them, really? How can you promise that? You haven't got enough foresight to know that's the truth. And don't promise things that you can't absolutely guarantee. So I think I already see lots of jobs that are changing because of the way we can use AI today, let alone this next generation of AI tools. So I think we're in for a big shake-up, and that really worries me about the future for our young people. My kids are 21 and 24 now. If they were 11 and 14, I'd be really worried about what the future looked like for them. So that generation, I think, could find it's a real struggle, because yes, I see that there could be new jobs, new businesses, new things that we do that get created, but I worry we're going to have a decade gap, which might go on longer, where we just don't know how to react to the machines and how to create something new that actually involves humans. We'll do all sorts of things with the machines, but I think humans might get left on the shelf.
What's the consultant's view, Megan?
The consultant's view. So actually, I put together a paper around this not that long ago, and one of the lines I liked came from the end, and it said only about 1% of jobs are truly fully automatable if we look at it, because we get a lot of confusion too when we talk about roles versus tasks being automatable, and we can say a task is automatable and people will assume it's the role, vice versa. But in reality, all jobs will change. It's coming, and I think one of the big things that another paper I'm working on, because as I said, there's not that much interesting about me. It is that it's looking at the behavioral change with AI. And one of the things that, and I was kind of asked, out of this paper, like, what is the one fundamental thing that a leader should take away from this, and like that can help them with their organization? And it's really understanding what the AI is doing. And it's not saying that you need to go in and know exactly, like, this is the data going in, this is how it has to be formatted, this is the specific types of analysis happening to the data, these are the algorithms that they're using, and this is what's coming out. It's understanding generally what it's doing, understanding kind of what the data that's going in, what's happening to that data, what is transforming it, what's coming out the other end, but really, what is that doing to work? Because what's on the label isn't what it's actually changing, is what we find a lot of the times. So like one example that I always lean back on, because it was one of my first big aha moments in business, was we were automating processes around onboarding. And there was one person in the team that was just so resistant to it. And I was like sitting there, just like, why is this person just so resistant? We're making their job better. And I really thought about it. And it was a realization that at that particular organization, one of the things I really emphasized was relationships. Your first 6 months at the organization was all about building relationships. And that's what you really valued in the employees, was what relationships they had in the organization. And the impact that we were doing wasn't making their job easier. Yes, it was. But it was also replacing those important relationships that individual had built. So all the people that they needed to email, depending on what the hire was, that's what we were replacing, was those relationships for that individual. And once I was able to identify that, we were able to have a different conversation with them and say, your role is changing because you're not going to be emailing them, but you have to understand all the people who are involved in this process and now oversee it and oversee the automation. And if there's changes, understand how to change that automation. And when we were able to have that more realistic conversation with the individual, their resistance went down. But I think that's something that we really need to understand, is it's not that it's going to automate this process. Like, okay, great, it's going to do that work for us. But what does that mean to us as individuals in an organization working with that technology? How is that going to affect our work and change that? And I think that that's a big piece that business leaders and especially like even if in gaming, when you're working with developers, what is it really doing for their work? Not just, it's going to help amplify your work or it's going to write code for you, but what does that really mean in that flow of work? And what does that mean? Like, is it, and you see people who, and I have a developer who said to me, well, I have to get into consulting now because all my work for being a developer is going to go away. It's going to be automated. And so we've had conversations about that. And it's really thinking about, is that actually true? What is the impact going to be? And thinking about how is it going to change roles? Because we're definitely going to see a massive shift in the work we do. And I think that's going to be really important to be honest about.
I definitely don't have as fantastic an overview as both Sue and Megan do on this topic. I've got a world I'd not like to live in and a world I'd like to live in. So I can put that out there based on kind of what we've done with Meaning Machine and sort of the perspective that I have from that. I think one thing that I've always taken away from is the fact that to build a good game that uses AI as an underpinning engine, it requires more creativity from a human. It requires more effort from the storytelling aspect. And the way I've often thought about it is, if you're engaging in any kind of storytelling, there's the iceberg metaphor that Hemingway gave us. So you actually have to write this entire iceberg, but actually what the player will see, or the reader or the viewer, or whatever, will be just the tip of it. With an AI game, the AI can dip into any of it. So you actually have to write more of it. It has to be more robust, more complex, more detailed, more able to withstand stress testing from players who do wildly wacky things. And so there's more opportunity there for humans. It's actually increasing the kind of things we can do. Of course, then I see on the other hand, companies like Rockstar firing a bunch of people. I can see games companies using it in the worst possible way, using these tools poorly. So that's not the world I want to live in. I think there is a middle path which speaks much more towards what you were saying, Megan, which is a sort of critical reevaluation of where the true value in what we do lies. And the way I've heard this is actually when there's a podcast about kind of AGI, artificial general intelligence, and I think it's often wildly overblown. And what this podcast was really helpfully doing was just grounding it. It's like, can a machine do kind of average level tasks that a human might be able to do? And if it can do those things, where does the value then lie? And the journalism was used as an example here. And it said, well, actually, probably all the value of a journalist's role lies in their network, rather than necessarily some of the other bits. It's not me saying this is what was on the podcast, but I thought it was an interesting example because it positioned what is much, much harder to automate and where those relationships are essential. And I think if we can do that in a creative context, then actually we see there's so much that cannot be automated. And especially in the games development context where everything is really complex, interoperable, it's all about teams working together, it's about complex systems interacting together. These are things that are actually quite resistant to, I think, some of the way in which these tools are framed and work. So that's where I have hope.
Absolutely. To echo a couple of points, really, I think creativity in the games and creative industries, immersive experiences, etc. I think it's going to change the way that people create experiences. But as we've spoken about with Slop, AI at the moment is not creative, really. It's not going to replace the art form of creativity in those industries. I think it is empowering people to do new things. And maybe to your point, Richard, you said, we observe that we have to put more content into these experiences we're creating. And one might think, well, why do I want to create them? I've got to do more work. I'll just do the sort of handcrafted version. Well, what it gives is it gives the player more freedom. It gives them a new experience. We want to push the boundaries. That's what the games industry does do all the time. It innovates. It creates new experiences. It looks at its past, but creates a new future. And I think that's what's really exciting for creatives and the adoption of AI in the creative industries is what new can we do with it? How bigger can we go? For instance, at the moment, if we put, a load of NPCs into a game, we give them all pre-written lines. They act out those lines based on logic, etc. It seems semi-human, or maybe it doesn't need to seem human, and it's fine. But now we can direct 100 NPCs using AI to deliver more human-like dialogue that reflects what's going on in the game, etc. And the role of the creator, the author, the game director, the narrative director is still very much 100% there. It's just allowing us to do things at new scale. And I think that's what is exciting and is the opportunity, certainly for creatives with AI. Just a couple of comments on how we sort of build trust and how we empower people to do that. I think one is a sort of openness, sharing, upskilling people. Like people need to understand what's possible, what the considerations are as an education piece as well. And generative AI is moving so quickly. And I think an observation is studios are trying to grapple with how they can use this for good creative experiences, not just for automation or productivity boosts. And there's definitely an education piece on what is possible with AI and what's not possible. It's almost, understanding what the limits are is part of your process to understanding what the benefits can be. A little bit of a ramble, but yeah, fundamentally, I think it's about empowering people to explore what new is possible rather than to immediately go in and think, oh, okay, how can we speed up or do something or automate something that we're already doing? Because in the creative space, that kind of sounds crazy.
No, I like that, and I think that's kind of good concluding words. And I like that there's a future for journalism as well as a journalist. But I would like to open it to the floor for any questions that we might have. I think Lydia has a microphone. Yeah.
About annoyingly. Yeah, this is our gateway to the online attendees.
Okay.
So,
no, that's fine. I think there was a question in the back row. Well, not quite back row.
Hi, thinking about the future and the next generation of workers into the workforce, what should they be thinking about now to prepare themselves in terms of things like if they're coming out of university or they're coming out of drama school or what have you, what should they have in their back pocket as part of their toolkit that will help them to navigate that future in AI? I have a friend who's an actor and he's taken his control of his own AI avatar because he was told by his agent that if he didn't, any avatars created by the film studios would be owned by the film studios. So he's created his own to give, so he owns his own copyright. But not many actors are aware that they need to do that. So what should we be teaching accountants, actors, whoever they are, what should they know before they go into the workforce?
We did a session back before Christmas with 500 computer science students, 14 to 18-year-olds. It was a Christmas lecture at the cathedral here in Bristol. And oh gosh, what an audience. 14 to 18-year-olds are all stony faced and it's very terrifying. You're not nearly as terrifying. But the message to them was that they're the first generation going into the workforce who have the potential to know more than their bosses about a really key technology. So in answer to your question, it's about taking an interest, as your actor friend has done, in the technology and thinking, what does this mean for me? And I come across so many people who will say, it's about numbers, and it's about data, and I don't really understand that stuff. And they're backing away from trying to really understand the tools. And I'm saying to them, you don't need to go and study computer science, but you do need to take an interest in these tools in just normal human language, and then keep thinking about what it can mean for you. And certainly taking an interest in data is absolutely key, I'd say, for any person who's either wanting to change mid-career or come into a career at the early part of the pipeline. Thinking about data, being comfortable talking about statistics, again, in normal human but in normal human language, rather than getting involved in the maths. If we can understand statistics better, then we understand what AI is doing, because it's all about probabilities, it's all about statistics. And then being bold enough, I think, having that inner confidence to offer ideas to people, to whether it's your boss or your boss's boss, the top of the company, whatever, to have that confidence to say, well, actually, I've been I'm playing a game and I've seen a different way of doing things, or, I've tinkered with some different tools that are out there, and offering those suggestions to the organization, because the bosses are frozen. They're the rabbits in the headlight thinking, I don't know what to do, don't know which way to turn. And it's too big for them. They don't know where to even start. So yeah, data, statistics, and courageousness to offer some ideas.
Those are some great points in a book, Statistics Without Tears. It's an old one, but it is really helpful to start those conversations. And one thing I tell my friends, because I get asked this question a lot, and I've always found it really interesting, because I had somebody with they had a 5-year-old, and they said, does my kid even need to know how to type? Because our whole human computer interaction is changing. How many of us actually type to our large language models? So like if you're using ChatGPT or Gemini, how many of us just have a conversation with it now? But I think what we really still need to focus on is a curiosity So to want to learn, to have that continuous learning, the ability to teach yourself, to go into a large language model and ask it questions to help you learn, and to be, and then hugely critical thinking, because they're just giving us like, it will agree with you no matter what, like. It's to an obnoxious point. And I think, and so thinking about like being able to develop skills, so having the creativity, like not, well, creativity, curiosity, continuous learning, being able to continuously upgrade your skills as you go, and not being afraid to go out there and try it. You know, I grew up in the generation where I was the obnoxious young person bringing in technology for years, and I was the change. I was like, why doesn't everyone want to do this? Now that I'm a little bit older and wiser, I can see how obnoxious I was as a young person. But to be that obnoxious young person that says, and I love people on my team that come to me and say, oh, I got the agent to do this, and they explain how they did it, and you know, even if it didn't work out, I just appreciate that they've tried, they've put that effort in, and they're trying new things that the rest of us don't have time for right now, because we're stuck in processes, we're stuck in administrative work. So having that curiosity to do it, and the boldness to do it, I think is really great advice.
And just to add to that, I think the critical thinking bit is absolutely spot on. It's something that we're very conscious of within the university, because there are so many ways you could misapply or poorly use AI in research, so many ways, and there are some ways where it can potentially help you. But in order to even begin to understand that question, you need to understand what you're trying to do. So you need to have that critical perspective, you need to have context, you need to understand the field to a degree, you need to have the traditional skills, and then you can, if you've got the time, you can spend that time also exploring how AI can meaningfully impact that area and stuff. So what I've been trying to do myself is continuously read newsletters about the industries that I'm working adjacent to and everything every week, to understand change that's happening there, and also kind of where beneficial change is coming through. So you mentioned your friend who's created their own avatar. I think that's spot on, because we're seeing really bad practice coming through around the use of voice actors' voices of actors' personas, of avatars, etc. But we're also seeing companies, I think there's one called Lingotian, which was actually about giving royalties to voice actors over time if they use their voices for future kind of emerging gameplay. So we're seeing companies step in, basically, because there is a vacuum from regulation and from government. So we're seeing companies having to come out and say, no, this is the right way to do it, and this is the way that actually is modeled on existing best practice. And then there are companies that are not doing that. So it's sort of navigating that field, understanding who the bad players are and who's actually doing the innovation that is potentially going to open up new avenues for traditional creative roles.
I would definitely third the critical thinking aspect. I mean, AI is sold as a magic wand or a box of magic. You know, you see the little stars everywhere, and that's how it's pitched. But in reality, it's flawed in many ways. It's weak in many ways, and being able to uncover that for yourself and be able to form an opinion on where its value is and where it isn't is an important skill, I think. The data economy, you touched on data. I think IP, data economy, you know, you were talking about an actor in particular, but I think generally just having an understanding of how data is monetized, how data is used to power these systems. Data is hugely valuable. And yeah, unfortunately, starting to think in the terms of data, if you're not already, is important. Final thing I want to say, I think University of Bristol and other universities are doing courses. They produce, 10-page sort of pamphlets, guides on what to consider in the era of AI. If you're a business, if you're in the creative industries, etc. So definitely hunting those down and just taking some time to do that broad thinking, that broad challenging of what you're doing relative to those trends and those considerations which are being shared and documented. So my thoughts.
I had one last thought. Sorry, one other thing that I was thinking of comes from my research, so it's going to come out sounding a little ultra geeky, but it's thinking about the contested spaces. So the spaces where we don't have answers yet and where two areas are merging together. So it's like your history degree in gaming and how it's bringing together the technology and something that we wouldn't think of, a museum having an AI game involved with it. We wouldn't think of those two things together, or physics and philosophy. So bringing two different areas and the spaces where we don't know those answers yet to focus in on those areas are going to be the areas that we need to solve. And obviously we don't have the answers right now. So there's obviously a future in those spaces.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a question at the, we got a question at the back and a question at the front, but Babel.
Cheers, thank you. My question's more for Richard and Ben. So as you mentioned, players respond pretty negatively to the inclusion of AI in games. Do you see that perception changing in the near future? And do you think do you think industry and academia kind of have a role in pushing that conversation forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd like to reflect on the difference between a sort of top level skepticism of AI in the games industry and a more nuanced appreciation of AI when one experiences it either as a creator or as a player. Because from our experience over the last 3 or 4 years, there has been, and there still is, a lot of skepticism to the letters AI and games, let's say, or and theatre, or whatever it is. But equally, as we've taken out the experiences that we're trying to push forward to the games industry, to expos, to events, the response is incredible. It's very positive. And there's a massive divide between those two things. Why is that? Well, I think it's partly because everything's moving so quickly. I think partly it's perhaps not driven by the games industry or the creative industries. It's driven by tech and by VC, etc. And I think also that there aren't that many great examples that are out there yet. So people can't believe almost in the opportunity. We took one of our games, Dead Meat, to Develop, which is, I think, the UK's biggest games conference last year. And we went to roundtables on AI and definitely a lot of skepticism. You know, went to some talks on AI, definitely like what to be wary of, etc. And then at the end of the event, we were hugely fortunate to win an award by attendees at that event for the game, shining sort of a new light, a new opportunity on, you know, gameplay. And I think, yeah, that for us was the first time we really saw strong evidence that there are these two like polar opposites, and we very much want to push forwards that second.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I mean, from my own perspective, I think it is that pace of change that's affected public opinion. So I think it was back in 2024 when InWorld, an American company that was developing some technology in this space, said, "Oh, loads of players want AI non-playable characters in games. They just really want it," and they had some data to back it up. And then more recently, we've seen surveys that say a little the opposite. So a lot's happened in less than 2 years. But I think that is largely driven by, as Ben was saying, kind of actually player perceptions of what's happening in the industry, of what they're seeing in the game, and they are a very particular demographic. I mean, Thierry, you were sort of mentioning this earlier. Players who dedicate that amount of time to an experience actually have an enormous threshold of what they're looking for, and this has caused huge problems within the industry. I mean, for those who know, Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out probably later this year. I don't have any insight knowledge on that, but you know, these are such big games that are developed over decades. They can't fail, but they also, the expectation is here. And whether games can ever actually continuously hit that massive bar is really hard. So players are really demanding and they aren't very forgiving. So when games companies are trying to hit that bar and they're like, "Oh, maybe I can just tweak it here, could just do that," and then players are like, "No." So there's this sort of really interesting dynamic going on there anyway. And yet, as Ben was saying, when you actually take players in person to play these new kinds of experiences that are coming out, and as Ben was saying, we don't actually have like a really killer "this came out and it worked" example, because it's still kind of a test bed space. It's still a really interesting space where indies are mostly doing the heavy lifting. The AAA studios are investing to some degree in some of this, and there's been some interesting demos, but also quite a lot of bland demos. I mean, just one that always gets me is when Ubisoft developed some AI non-playable characters, and the response was generally, more bland non-playable characters from because that's kind of a public perception of non-playable characters in Ubisoft games. So players, again, weren't that particularly forgiving of kind of innovation from big studios. But in the indie space, that's where I think we're seeing a lot of interesting developments. And as I think that continues, we'll see new markets, new genres opening up.
Back as well, I think that's still, yeah.
Hi everyone. Very interesting panel. Obviously, a whole variety of economical, venture capital, scale, and then ethical questions. And the thing I wanted to come back to is the thing in the title of conscience. The thing that sort of, I don't know, it's kind of in the foothills of all of the answers that you spoke about, regulatory environment, everything, is that conscience isn't really found in a venture capital term sheet. And certainly from a user engagement point of view, you spoke about YouTube Shorts and things like that. Not really found in that either. So I suppose from a sort of enforcement mechanism of how to get to the good version of this if it can be found, or a set to potentially put the brakes on things, either in this geography or in every geography, where can conscience be injected into this, I suppose, given that generally, and being a venture capitalist, I'm very fundamentally aware of this myself, it's not generally found in the people who are producing this or trying to drive it to real scale.
Yeah, and when we look at global governance of AI, it's really weak at the moment. So the United Nations could, in theory, be one body, or the OECD might be another, that would bring a sort of cohesive approach globally to what we do and don't allow AI to do. But it's not really working at the moment. We did see under the Biden government in America, we did see some steps forward as if maybe we're making some progress, but then of course, Trump reversed all that. We are seeing a lot of push coming from Chinese companies, Chinese investors, Chinese policymakers who are filling the gap, frankly, left by the Americans, and bringing with them a particular perspective on what is acceptable, what is socially acceptable, what is ethical, because it's ethics isn't just one thing; it varies so hugely. So, but do I see a uniting approach to AI ethics and AI control and regulation? No, I really don't. And that worries me, because you've got, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but there's an organization called Pause AI, not pause as in puppies, but PAUSE. And Pause AI is saying, we ought to have a pause on this rush towards artificial general intelligence, and we ought to actually think more about what are we trying consciously to create here, rather than just having this money chasing it and money pursuing to try and be the first to develop it and capture the whole market. It's not really getting traction because the money is so powerful, and that's fundamentally what we're talking about here: power. The power and the control is shifting hugely away from all of us as normal human beings and into the hands of this tiny number of people and organizations. And there was a woman called Rachel Caldecott who talks about this a lot, and she's put it brilliantly when she said we need to make sure that AI benefits 8 billion people, not just 8 billionaires. But we're nowhere near that at the moment. I couldn't agree more. I think it too much money, and we did have an era at the late 2010s where ethics became a real big thing, and we had Kathy O'Neill, wasn't it, who wrote Weapons of Math Destruction. There's a great, I believe it's Netflix documentary. Is it Netflix? One of them did a documentary. She was in it as well. And we had a kind of an era where people were pushing back. And in London, I know we had AI ethics groups starting up left, right, and center, but they all seem to have, for the most part, disbanded, and a few people I know that were in that space. But we are seeing in business, thankfully, I think what we're really recognizing is a growth of a position around like responsible AI ethics officer type role. So we're starting to see that, and that's where when I do talk to businesses, this is where my push is that you have to have your own guardrails and really very clear guardrails within your organization. I was talking to someone in a recruitment, doing recruitment tech for an organization, and they were like, well, that's a really great point, because their challenge was because they didn't have those really good guardrails from the organization, they couldn't push the vendors and have the tough questions because they didn't have, law didn't say it, the organization didn't say it. So why would you give the secrets away? Like, you can say it's ML magic, machine learning magic, and they're doing the work. But if we have those strong guardrails, so I think where we want to where the push will likely come from is businesses wanting to have
guardrails because they want to avoid the risk. They don't want to be the court case where those ethical decisions get made, and they want to avoid that arena. So I think that's where we have some hope, and people like us and talking to businesses and pushing that viewpoint. But it is right now a global one. I don't know if we'll ever get there, because a lot of the like we see from the UK and the US perspective, the reason why they want to pull back regulation is because they feel it's competitive. And that's going to give them a competitive edge to step back from that. So it's a really tough one, unfortunately.
Just a footnote, really. One thing we have done through the university is, there's some people in the room who came to these things. We hosted workshops where we brought early career creatives from across games and XR experiences to come and work together to develop toolkits for ethical practice around the use of these things in their practice. So it was a co-creation exercise. We were really interested in surfacing, the challenges, the opportunities, but all within a kind of deeply ethical framework. So we cover sustainability, the moral, the legal side of it, and we had panels and talks about that. We worked with tools that were being developed by companies like Mini Machine, and again, it was a very local level, hard to scale that. But again, I think it speaks to the fact that actually that it is going to come from the place of work rather than necessarily from top down. I think it's going to come bottom up. But that's one way we found injecting ethics can work. It's very strange.
If you want to contribute, you can. I was going to say, otherwise we have time for one more question.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Someone asked Ben a question. I thought there was another hand. Yeah.
Thank you. We talked a little bit about trust in AI, and Ben touched on being open and being transparent. So my question for the panel is, what's your opinion on AI tags, especially mandatory AI tags on content?
Yeah, I think very broadly and quickly, AI content, at least in the space that we're in, should be tagged. Yeah, I support it. I don't know how to go deeper, really. Sorry.
Should it be mandatory by legislation?
I think in games, at least at the moment, it is effectively in a way, and that appears to be working. So in that space, yeah, I think it should continue to be that way. More broadly, I'd have to think on that for a moment.
I think it comes back to that point we made about power, and that the power here lies with the platforms typically rather than the individual. So games as an example, Steam requires, I think, believe at the moment still, that any game that's developed with any form of AI is flagged as such, but they could change that because they could find that almost every game that's being published has some form of that, and so it might then become meaningless. So they actually have an enormous amount of power in this space to demand or make change or flag these things, as do platforms like YouTube, as do social media platforms. They're not seemingly stepping up to that challenge, and they might, for their own business models, choose not to. So I think, again, that's where we're living in quite a different world. Personally, I think absolutely we should. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a conundrum, because then it becomes, if we put AI labels on everything that's generated by AI, does it come a world like in the US where they have cancer warnings on everything because it just kind of meets a rule rather than the reality? And that's a tough challenge. And I can see in places like gameplay where it could become a very blurred line quickly, but then we see other aspects like in recruitment where historically so far that you hadn't had to declare that you're using AI in the process, but now it's starting to become more of a thing. And I've always pushed that we should be doing notification and accommodation, not only letting people know how and where we're using AI, giving them a chance, like if if the system's profiling them in some way to see what it's done, to make sure it's accurate, and to give people accommodation so that if it's not appropriate for them, that they can choose another route. Whether that will become a reality, I think we're going in that direction. I hope we go in that direction, but I could also see, because we use AI, will become so embedded in everything we do that it becomes a bit of a blanket warning that you kind of just expect to see it there because it just is. So I think it's more than just letting people know, it's letting them know that it's there, but really giving them the opportunity to understand what is it doing, how is it impacting them, and a chance to, especially if it's about them. And I could see this would be an interesting question back to you guys. In a gameplay, if you've profiled a user to try and make a prediction about what they would like, wouldn't it be better, like, thinking about Google, for example? I remember years ago, Google, Google knew more about you than you knew about yourself. And I went in there, I went into the back, like went and queried what it was that it knew about me, and it thought I was a man because I looked at so much technology. And I really wanted to just correct it. I just wanted to be like, actually, I'm into these things, and like, well, because I'm into motorcycles, but I'm also into horses. I just like things that go fast. So I think I think we need to rethink about, it's not just a blanket warning label, but how does it impact people, and how can we accommodate? How can we make it a better experience? Because I think it is. We kind of do have that power perspective of it right now, where it's 8 people in Silicon Valley, where all the data is going to. How do we make it for the 8 million? Rachel Colcott's great, but yeah, that's a great quote from her. Thanks.
And I think certainly anytime soon, we're not going to see regulation pushing on a button like that. So there is the opportunity then for particular companies to say, we want to make this our USP. And when we talk about responsible AI, there's 7 pillars of responsible AI, and one of them is transparency and explainability. So being transparent about how we're using tools, when we won't use them, when we will use them, is a really fundamental pillar of responsible AI. And that's an opportunity then for some companies to say, right, we're going to make that our thing, and we're going to differentiate ourselves from the others because we are being more transparent, even though the regulation isn't pushing us that way. And that kind of reminds me of something I should have mentioned to the previous question. There is, being optimistic for a change, there is actually an organisation, fairly new organisation, led by Stuart Russell, called the International Association for Safe and Ethical AI. IASEAI. They've got their second conference just coming up in Paris 2 weeks' time, 10 days' time. That is a bright, shining beacon of light, in my humble opinion, of a group of people who are deeply imbued in the technology, how it's being used, and who are driving for change and driving for really good standards and driving to try and bring the world together to create a better, safer environment for us. And that's, again, with the next generation of AI tools rather than so much the ones we have today. So there is hope. There are people out there who are trying to do the right thing, and may they prosper.
I like that, ending on a note of hope. I think that is pretty much exactly the time that we had. I know there are a few more questions, but we have drinks and canapes as well. And I think Caroline has got a commercial message to conclude the session. I'm really sorry to the online people as well that we didn't get to answer any of theirs.
Lovely, thank you. So I've got the role of trying to summarise this evening and some reflection. So I was never in more need of an AI note taker than this evening listening to this. Okay, but what we've heard tonight isn't just a conversation about AI. It's been a conversation about creativity, responsibility, and people. In fact, we started with creativity. It was described as seeing what people see and doing something no one has thought of. But we're clearly at a moment of change in redefining what creativity is. It's becoming collaborative, channeled through AI, and even shaped by consumers themselves. AI, though, isn't being framed as a replacement. It helps join the dots and fill in the gaps. It enables freedom, agency, and involvement. It allows us to iterate at scale and at less cost. As we heard, it's not replacing art or artistry, but empowering people. At the same time, dumb things seem smart, and many tools are being used simply because they can. Where the gravity really landed this evening was governance. The conversation just simply hasn't moved on enough. Ownership, user data, copyright, data dignity still unresolved. A very small amount of FTSE 350 firms have a governance approach. So the question lingers, is this about a quick buck or doing things the right way? Underneath it all sits data. There's a huge gap in data structures and governance. The next generation of tools will only work if we unpick workflows and data silos. AI readiness is really about data readiness, and nobody wants to be in the living museum. And finally, trust. Trust requires accuracy and an awareness of limitations. Ultimately, we don't have an answer. Jobs are changing, some will go. Only 1% of roles are automatable, but many tasks are. All jobs will change. So perhaps the real takeaway in all of this is the transformation ahead isn't just technical, it's human. And how we shape that will define whether this era is remembered for acceleration alone or for responsibility that goes alongside it. So there's a couple of 5 or 6 points. So creativity is being redefined. Seeing what people see and doing somewhere no one has thought of at a moment of change and redefining what creativity is. Creativity is expanding, not disappearing. AI is an amplifier. It helps join dots and fill in the gaps, not replacing art or artistry, but empowering people. AI extends human agency, but reflection must keep pace. Governance is lagging. The conversation hasn't moved on with ownership, data and copyright unresolved, and only a third of FTSE 350 firms prepared. Technology is outpacing accountability. Data is the foundation, a huge gap in data structures. We must unpick workflows and data silos, and AI readiness is data readiness. Trust and jobs remain uncertain. Ultimately, we still don't have the answer. Only 1% of roles are automatable, but many tasks are. The transformation ahead is human, not just technical. And my 6th point is, when we head out to the platform for a drink and a bite to eat, please remember that Megan does love a joke, but she is not giving you her email address under any circumstances. So with that, I would like to say a huge thank you to Thierry and the panel for their thoughts and discussion, and thank you for your attention. Yes, there is a commercial break right at the end. You're absolutely spot on. You can see some leaflets on your chairs with a QR code. So if you enjoyed tonight and you'd like to sign up for more of these events, it's a QR code to sign up. And we also have a newsletter for Bristol Innovations, which will keep you updated on our projects, collaborations and other activities to sign up. So please do stay in the loop and don't disappear off. Stay with us, head out to the platform and enjoy some of the food. Thank you.